Los Angeles, March 1971. The back gymnasium of the All-American Open Karate Tournament, a room that smelled of pine floor wax and old leather and the particular staleness of 500 bodies generating heat in a space built for 200. There were, by the count of the tournament organizers, 312 registered competitors inside that building that afternoon. Another 80 or 90 had come to watch. Outside, the March sky was the flat, uninterested gray of a city that does not notice weather. Masahiko Kimura was not registered. He had paid $3 at the door. He stood near the east wall in a gray wool jacket buttoned to the collar, a canvas bag over one shoulder, eyes that did not track the room the way everyone else's did. He was 62 years old. He weighed 183 pounds. He was 5'7". None of that was what you noticed. What you noticed, if you noticed anything at all, which most people did not, was how still he was. Not the stillness of patience, the stillness of something already finished. In 11 minutes and some seconds, he would step onto the main floor and put a 27-year-old ranked karate champion face down on the mat using 3 techniques, the third of which he barely completed. And when it was over, the 312 registered competitors in that room would go quiet in the specific, involuntary way that happens when something real has occurred in a space full of performance. But that was 11 minutes away. His name was Derek Sato, and he deserved the room's attention. 6'1", 211 pounds, 27 years old, 3-time Southwest Regional Karate Champion, 1968 through 1970. He had trained under Tsutomu Oshima for 11 years, real Shotokan training, the kind built on repetition until the hips move before the mind asks them to. His competition record stood at 44 wins and 4 losses, and 2 of those losses were disputed on points. By every measurable standard in that gymnasium that afternoon, he was the most decorated fighter in the room. He came in through the competitor's entrance at the north end, which required ducking the doorframe, which he did without thinking about it. That's how you know someone lives in a body at the edge of what the world is built for. He carried his gear bag in one hand and held his tournament bracket in the other and was reading it as he walked, and the people in his path moved without him asking them to. Not from fear, from the geometry of the thing. You do not remain in the path of that kind of certainty. He had been demonstrating since 9 that morning, 3 exhibition bouts, each one instructive. The first was against a 23-year-old with a Tong Soo Do background, who made the standard error of reaching across center line. Sato's reverse punch arrived at that student's sternum before the overextended arm had completed its arc. Not hard, controlled. The sound of it was flat and specific, and the student sat down without any drama. The crowd, a loose ring of observers who had formed around the floor, made a sound that was not quite applause and not quite surprise, but somewhere between. The second exhibition was longer. His opponent was a 29-year-old Goju Ryu black belt, stocky with the kind of upper body strength that makes a fighter generous with grabs, which is both a weapon and an assumption. Sato let him establish the grab, let him feel it settle. Then he stepped inside, not against the grip, with it, using the same line the hand had established to travel so that the grab became a guide, and threw a controlled Uda Mawashi Geri that arrived so high and so precisely that it tapped the other man's left ear without moving his head. The Goju Ryu man put his hands up and nodded once. The crowd was not quiet this time. The third exhibition was not a fight, it was a kata. He ran Kanku Sho alone on the center mat, moving through its 65 movements in 1 minute and 48 seconds without a seam between them. The kind of kata performance where you find yourself holding your breath and can't quite explain why. When he finished, the room held the silence for 2 full seconds before the applause started. This is what earned respect means. Not one dramatic moment, 3 different kinds of proof, each one true, and the cumulative weight of them settled into the room like weather. 3 of Chuck Norris's students were in that audience,
Later, two of them would say that before the afternoon ended, they had completely revised their ranking of who the most dangerous man in that building was. They would be wrong about the revision, it turned out, but they weren't wrong to make it. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the tournament coordinator, a small man named Phil Garrison, who ran the All-American Open and 5 other regional events and had the particular exhausted authority of someone who has been in charge of things for too long, put a microphone on a short aluminum stand at the center of the room for the purpose of announcing the afternoon draw. Sato was standing 3 feet from it when Garrison finished. He picked it up. He said that Shotokan was the only system in that room built on genuine scientific principles of body mechanics. He said that the other disciplines represented, and he named 3 of them, Tong-Soo-Do, Hapkido, and Kenpo, were, at their technical foundation, approximations of what Shotokan had worked out correctly in the 1930s. He said that the American enthusiasm for grappling arts was a product of not understanding what a properly structured striking system could do, and that the grapplers in the room, if they wanted to understand why their approach was limited, he was available to educate them. The room had gone from applause to attention to a particular kind of stillness that has a temperature to it, something slightly cooler than the surrounding air. Then he said that he had watched 3 years' worth of tournament footage and that the most overestimated competitor in American martial arts, technically proficient at the level of advanced student, not master in his honest assessment, was Chuck Norris. The room's reaction was not uniform. It moved in phases, a ripple of discomfort from the people who knew what was about to happen to the social architecture of the afternoon, then a harder silence from the people who had trained with Norris or under his influence, then a small sound, not laughter, something flatter from the people who had already decided they wanted to see where this went. Then he said, "If Chuck Norris is in this building right now, I want him to come to the center of this floor and explain to me, in front of everyone here, what it is he believes he knows that I don't, because from everything I've seen of his work, the answer to that question should be a very short conversation." The gray wool jacket had been in the room for 11 minutes. He moved from the east wall at a pace that was not urgent and not slow, the pace of a thing that is already decided. People stepped back not because they were told to, but because the geometry, again, required it. A path opened. He walked it. The jacket was buttoned. His hands were at his sides. His face was the face of someone walking to a car. He stopped at the edge of the exhibition floor, 12 feet from where Sato was still holding the microphone, and the room around him made the sound rooms make when 390 people stop talking at the same moment. Masahiko Kimura had not been announced. He had not been introduced. He had paid $3 at the door like the rest of the audience, and the tournament coordinator, Phil Garrison, who was standing 4 feet to Sato's left, would later say that he had no idea who the man in the gray jacket was until 30 seconds after the exchange was over, and that he would be embarrassed about that for the rest of his life. Kimura's answer to Derek Sato's challenge was short. He said he was not here to have a conversation. Sato's face moved through 3 distinct expressions in those seconds. The first was recalibration, a rapid, almost clinical survey, the face of a man measuring an unknown variable against a familiar scale, finding the variable smaller than the scale required and adjusting downward. He was 6'1", Kimura was 5'7", he had 28 pounds on him and was 35 years younger. These are not nothing. The second was something closer to consideration. It arrived later than the first and lived longer. Something in the stillness of the man across the floor had transmitted itself in a way that the arithmetic of height and age did not account for. It registered not in Sato's conscious assessment, but somewhere below it, in the part of the brain that has been making threat evaluations before language. The third was performance. He chose it, turned back to the room with the microphone still in his hand, and said calmly that he was happy to welcome the old man onto the floor. The room exhaled. It was the wrong move, not the challenge, the performance of confidence on top of the moment of real uncertainty. The real thing had been there. He covered it over, and the covering was visible, and the people watching had known the difference, even if they could not have articulated it. Before he walked forward, Kimura turned to a man standing to his right, a younger man in a white judo jacket, one of the day's registered competitors, a 24-year-old Shotokan practitioner named Kenji Watanabe, who trained out of a dojo in Pasadena, and who would, years later, describe this moment in an interview with a Japanese martial arts publication. Kimura said 4 words to him. Watanabe remembered them precisely. He said, "Watch where I look." The jacket came off first. He folded it, not quickly, not slowly, and placed it on the nearest folding chair. Beneath it was a plain white judo gi top, no belt, worn open at the collar. The canvas bag came off his shoulder next. He set it beside the chair without looking at it. He had worn no tie. There were no shoes to remove. He had come in wearing tabi, the split-toed socks, so he stepped onto the mat without ceremony, without having to perform the transition. Sato, meanwhile, had moved to the center of
Distance shorter than it had been, and the technique's natural firing range, the interval Shotokan Kumite is calibrated for, was no longer available. Judo is not just a grappling art. Judo is a negotiation about distance. Sato knew this. He had the conceptual knowledge. What he had not understood until this moment, 1 minute and 40 seconds into the exchange, is that the negotiation had begun the moment they stepped onto the mat, and he had been losing it incrementally through every technique he had thrown. And the man across from him had not needed to see him to know exactly where he was in space at every moment, because Kimura was not tracking Sato's eyes or face or weapon hand. He was reading the floor. He was reading the air pressure. He was reading the weight distribution that every human body telegraphs through its posture 7 to 10 frames before the technique begins. Sight is not information. Sight is one signal among many, and sight is slow. 1 minute 50. Sato's breathing had changed. Not labored, he was in excellent condition, but different in character. The breath of a man who has recalculated and has not yet arrived at a new strategy. Kimura closed. He did it in 2 steps. The first step erased the interval entirely. The second step placed him at Sato's right side, inside the guard, where no Shotokan technique originates, in the space that every striker's training leaves empty because it is outside the geometry of the system. His right arm went around Sato's back. His left hand found Sato's right sleeve. This is the grip in judo called kumikata, the clinch entry. Sato was a striker. He had not trained the inside space, the grappling range, the wrestling interval. His body did not have an automatic response for the moment when an opponent is already past the hands. He attempted to create distance. The correct response in a striking system when the grappler closes is to push, short strike, and use the hips to deny the hip-to-hip contact that makes throws possible. He did 2 of these 3 things. He pushed, he struck short, an elbow, not a fist, which was good thinking. He did not manage to deny the hip contact because Kimura had already placed his hip inside Sato's hip before the push arrived, and the push therefore became a pull, Sato's own force completing the work that the throw required. This is ogoshi, the major hip throw. In clean execution, the thrower's hip functions as a fulcrum. The attacker's weight, redirected, travels over that fulcrum and arrives on the floor at an angle that physics selects, not strength. Kimura's hips rotated. Sato's feet left the mat. The trajectory was a parabola, high at the near shoulder, lower at the hip, arriving at the floor in the order the geometry required. He did not complete it. The throw existed for 1 second in full mechanical execution, Sato airborne, the outcome determined, and Kimura held him. He did not release. He controlled the descent, slowing it through the same grip that had initiated it, so that Sato arrived on the mat at perhaps 40% of the velocity the technique would have generated to completion. He arrived on his back. He arrived without impact. The floor received him. Kimura stood over him for a moment with the grip still held, Sato on his back,
and then he opened his hands and stepped back. He did not step away quickly. He stepped back one pace. 2. The way you step back from something you are done with but do not wish to dishonor. The grip release was the statement. He had been in position to slam a 211-pound man into a gymnasium floor with enough rotational velocity to cause serious injury, and he had instead delivered him to the floor the way you would set down something breakable. The technique was complete at the point of takedown. The physics were done. What Kimura had not done was the follow-through, and every trained person in that room understood that the absence of the follow-through was itself the content. It was not mercy extended, it was information delivered. Sato had been put on the mat not by strength, but by the completion of a process that Kimura had been running since before the first technique was thrown, and the process was complete as it needed to be. The floor of the gymnasium continued its stillness in the same flat, indifferent way. The fluorescent lights above continued their faint electric hum. 390 people did not move. Sato lay on his back for 2 seconds. Then he sat up. Then he stood. He did not look around the room. He looked at Kimura directly, which was the right thing to do, and took something, and he said 3 words. He said, "You couldn't see." Not a question, a statement that had arrived late, that had been working its way to the surface during the final 40 seconds of the exchange and had finally reached him. Kimura's response was also 3 words. He said, "That was why." There was a moment between them that the room watched without understanding entirely. It was not a bow, though Sato did bow correctly, which Kimura returned. It was the moment before the bow. What passed between them in that moment was something closer to the transfer of a technical fact. Sato had asked something with his whole body, and Kimura had answered it, and the answer was still processing. Then it was finished. Kimura walked back to the folding chair. He picked up the canvas bag. He picked up the gray wool jacket, put the left arm in first, then the right, then buttoned it from the bottom. 3 buttons, the top left open. Kenji Watanabe, the young Shotokan practitioner who had heard the 4 words at the edge of the mat, would later describe this moment in specific detail in that later interview, the jacket going on, the bottom button first. He had noticed it at the time without knowing why, and it had stayed with him. Kimura walked towards the north exit. He did not walk through the crowd. The crowd had arranged itself in a corridor, not deliberately, not the organized parting of something staged, but the way people get out of the way of moving water, through a sequence of individual small decisions that collectively produce a path. He walked the path. 5 or 6 hands reached out and touched the sleeve of the gray jacket as he passed, the way people touch things to confirm they are real. He did not stop for any of them. The door opened. The door closed. The fluorescent lights continued their hum in the same flat, indifferent way. The stories from that afternoon spread in the way that stories spread in 1971 among people who trained in gymnasiums and community centers and church basements. Telephone, repetition, the slight inflation that accrues with each telling, the original fact submerged beneath its accumulated interpretation. By the time the story had traveled 3 removes from the room, Kimura had defeated Sato in a single technique. By 5 removes, he had defeated 3 men. By 10, he had walked into the tournament as a deliberate provocation, had been challenged by multiple competitors, and gone through them sequentially. None of that is what happened. What happened is what has been described here. 1 exchange, clean and complete, lasting approximately 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Let the record be clear about what is agreed upon. The technique was real, the room was full, and the man who paid $3 at the door walked out without fanfare. Everything else that follows is reconstruction, with the caveat clearly stated where it applies. What the historical record is certain about is this: Masahiko Kimura had lost his vision progressively through a degenerative condition that had been diagnosed in 1962, and by 1971, he was functionally blind. capable of distinguishing light from shadow in his right eye and nothing in his left. He had continued to train and to teach for the entirety of that period. He had, by his own account to his students, done precisely what the afternoon in Los Angeles demonstrated. He had rebuilt his entire spatial vocabulary around pressure, sound, floor vibration, and what he called the weight of a person's intention, the way a body broadcasts its next movement in the half-second before the nervous system executes it. His competitive record before the vision loss included a number of verified competition victories and is documented in the Judo Historical Archive. His post-diagnosis training and teaching are recorded in the accounts of his students, several of whom published memoirs in Japanese that have been partially translated. What the afternoon in Los Angeles amounts to in the context of that record is a demonstration consistent with what his students already knew and had been unwilling to say in public, because there is a kind of knowledge that sounds false until it is made visible in front of 390 witnesses. What happened to Derek Sato afterward is documented and runs contrary to how this story might naturally be expected to close. He did not disappear from competition. He did not withdraw. In 1972, 14 months after the gymnasium in Los Angeles, he took third place at the National Karate Championships in his division. In 1974, he won. He went on to open the Sato Shotokan Academy in Culver City in 1976, which is still operating. One of his students placed at the U.S. Open in 1983. Another placed in 1988. If you were looking for a story in which the arrogance of that afternoon destroyed the man that displayed it, this is not that story. Humiliation can run in either direction. What Sato received